Here comes an insanely important episode if you're about to buy or switch to an electric car. The heat pump is, in a way, your time machine at the charging station. Welcome to the Car Podcast. My name is Jacob, and today I'm going to drill through one of the biggest misconceptions about electric cars, here in the winter cold, namely the heat pump. For years, we've discussed how many extra kilometers a heat pump gives us while driving. FDM has just conducted a test showing that the actual gain in range is only very marginal. They tested two identical cars from Hyundai, their Insta model, with and without a heat pump. Here, they found a 4% difference under cold conditions. It was significantly less when the weather was warm. And that leads many to believe that the heat pump is just an expensive gimmick. But is this really where its value lies? The answer is no. The true battleground for the heat pump is not on the road. It's actually at the charging station. And I've dug deep into the technical analyses to give you the definitive proof of this. Let me just add a quick note here, because when I was editing the episode together, I realized that something really important was missing, namely an explanation of what a heat pump actually is and how it works in an electric car. And how can you make an episode focused on heat pumps and then forget to explain what they are and how they work? So I just had to fix that, which means there will be a quick insert here. Imagine a situation where you're standing with an electric car on a chilly morning. You turn on the car, but unlike your old fossil-fueled car, there's no warm engine sending free heat into the cabin. Electric cars are so efficient that they hardly waste any energy. This also means you have to use power from the battery just to keep the car warm. This is where the heat pump comes into play as a quiet hero. Well, or partially quiet, because some heat pumps are simply so noisy that you wouldn't believe it. It all depends on the quality and performance of the heat pump itself. So if you want a very quiet electric car, it might not be the best idea to choose one with a heat pump. The heat pump works like a refrigerator running in reverse. It draws in the cool morning air and then finds even the smallest amounts of heat energy and amplifies them so you can have a warm cabin without draining the battery. It uses a refrigerant that heats up when it is compressed. The heat is then sent through a condenser, which releases the heat again. After that, the pressure drops and the temperature falls again, just like in a refrigerator. But in the electric car, the heat from the condenser is used to warm the battery and the cabin, as well as the most advanced systems. The heat pump can also cool down the battery if it gets too hot, and at the same time it recycles the heat from the battery in the cabin, so you have the option to heat it up or release it outside. This is energy recycling at a high level, and depending on your needs or driving patterns, it might just be the reason why you choose your next electric car with or without a heat pump. I've chosen to call the first part the battle against the cold. First, we need to understand the problem. When you arrive at a fast charger on a mild winter day, or in the spring or autumn, your battery is cold when you reach the charging station. And a cold lithium-ion battery simply can't charge quickly. It's more or less dangerous if you force a high current into a battery that's near freezing, so you risk causing permanent damage to the cells. This is what is now called lithium plating. The car's electronics are aware of this, and that's why the car simply limits the charging speed significantly until the battery is warm enough for you to charge quickly. The solution is preheating or preconditioning. The car then has to actively heat the huge battery pack up to its optimal operating temperature, and that's a process that consumes a lot of energy. But what is the precise magic temperature that the system is aiming for? And why is the heat pump so dramatically much better at reaching this goal than a simple heating element? I'll get back to that in just a moment. Here in part 2, it's all about the pursuit of the optimal charging temperature. I've looked into what the major manufacturers and technical analyses say is the optimal target for maximum charging speed. Most sources point to a narrow window between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius to achieve the maximum charging speed, which is that impressive 200 kilowatts to 300 kilowatts. This is the goal for most car manufacturers. If you don't reach this optimal temperature, you're wasting time. The charging speed simply gets dragged out, and you end up paying for the electricity used to heat the battery inefficiently. However, you also do this when you're driving, and it's in this phase that the heat pump proves its worth. Not with these 4% extra kilometers while driving without preheating a battery, but in the efficiency it delivers in thermal management and preheating specifically of the battery. I've found it in black and white. How many times more efficient do you think the heat pump is at heating? And what does this thermal difference mean in minutes at the charging station? I'll get to that now. Because here in part 3, we're going to talk about the true strength of the heat pump, the time machine at the charger. Now, I want to look at the technical facts that transform the heat pump from a marginal gain to a necessity in colder climates. Note that the advantage almost disappears at minus 10 degrees Celsius. Facts. It's all about the COP factor, coefficient of performance. A car without a heat pump uses an electric heating element, a bit like a toaster or an electric radiator. It has a COP value of 1 to 1. That means 1 kilowatt of electricity becomes 1 kilowatt of heat. That's why it's extremely inefficient to heat a huge battery pack that way. A car with a heat pump, on the other hand, works like a reverse refrigerator. So it moves heat from one place to another. It typically has a COP value of 3 to 1 or even up to 4 to 1. That means for every kilowatt of electricity you use from your battery, it generates 3 to 4 kilowatts of heat. This means that the heat pump is 3 to 4 times more energy efficient at raising the battery temperature from, for example, 0 degrees Celsius up to around 30 degrees Celsius. So what does this mean in practice? Well, it means a saving of time. I've seen in analyses that properly preheating a coal battery can significantly reduce your total charging time, and I've also experienced it myself. In one example I found, it took 13 minutes to charge a cold battery from 70 to 80%. Then they drove up to the charging station with a preheated battery, and in the same car it only took about 8 minutes. So that's a saving of 5 minutes during a short break. Mind you, this is in the range from 70 to 80%. Those 5 minutes are gained thanks to the heat pump's efficiency in thermal management. It doesn't just save you electricity, it also saves you time. So if the real benefit of the heat pump is time savings, what is its actual value? And if you use fast chargers often, how quickly will you have earned back the extra money you spent on the heat pump? Before I get to that conclusion, please like the episode and leave a positive review, because you help motivate me to do all this free work I do with the car podcast so we can all get smarter together. Back in 2023, Recurrent Auto conducted a study showing how far an electric car drives with a heat pump compared to one without a heat pump when heating the cabin at different temperatures. That study was done in the US, so in Fahrenheit, I've converted it to Celsius and made my own comparison of the range as a bar chart. And it might be a bit hard to follow along here on the car podcast if you're only listening to us in audio. And that's why I would of course recommend that you go to the Car Podcast YouTube channel and watch along there. Vertically, that is, going up on this bar chart, I have the range or the range loss in percent. And horizontally, I have the different temperature degrees at which the measurements were taken. If we start at 18 degrees, then cars that have a heat pump lose 15% to all these different technical things that consume power, including heating or cooling the cabin. If you don't have a heat pump, it's 27%. So there really is quite a difference there. That difference becomes even greater at around 13 degrees Celsius, because here you only lose 14% in a car with a heat pump, whereas if you have a car without a heat pump, that is with a traditional PTC heater, then it's 34%. And a PTC heater is what people often call a toaster. At 8 degrees Celsius, the difference between the two sources decreases. So a car with a heat pump manages with 33%, and a car without a heat pump, well, it loses 41% of its range. And this is in relation to a WLTP figure. It's also important to note that when we're down to 3 degrees Celsius, cars with a heat pump lose an average of 38%, and cars without a heat pump lose 45%. Then we get down to minus 2 degrees, and here it really starts to get close, because a car with a heat pump loses 43%, and a car without a heat pump loses 48%. And at minus 7 degrees Celsius, well, there's only a 3% difference. A car with a heat pump loses 48%, and a car without a heat pump loses 51% of its range. And when we get down to minus 12 degrees, well, then there is almost no effect left in a heat pump. Of course, it's not that often we have minus 12 degrees in Denmark, I know that. But this is just to give you an idea of when you get the greatest effect in cars with heat pumps. And this also gives you a basis for making a decision when you're out buying your next electric car. But at minus 12 degrees, the car with a heat pump loses about 53% of its range. When you include heating the cabin, heating the battery, lights, and all sorts of other comfort features like seat heating and so on in the cabin, and all of that is taken into account, then it's about minus 53% of the actual WLTP range, and a car without a heat pump loses 54% in this case. And the next diagram I've made is a line graph showing the development of the range loss. And again, on the vertical axis, I have the range loss in percent, and on the horizontal axis, I have the different temperature degrees, just like before. And this is to make it a bit easier for you to follow when or how much more efficient a car with a heat pump is compared to a car without a heat pump. And as we can see here, it's exactly the same numbers that are repeated as in the bar chart above. And what this means is that what you can see is that the heat pump is most efficient at milder temperatures, that is, between 18 and 13 degrees Celsius. There we have an improvement of 12.8 to 13.6% compared to a car without a heat pump. The efficiency then drops at lower temperatures, and at minus 12 degrees, it's only an improvement of 1.1%. At minus 12 degrees Celsius, both systems, both with and without a heat pump, lose over 50% of their range. The absolute biggest difference is seen at moderate temperatures around 18 to 13 degrees. And as we approach 8 degrees Celsius, well, then we are down to a difference of just about 8%. And it only gets smaller and smaller depending on how warm the weather is outside. But that was just so you also have a basis for decision regarding how efficient the heat pump actually is. And the conclusion here in part 4 must be that the heat pump is not a simple add-on. It's performance versus economy. In other words, the heat pump is not just a simple gimmick to improve range by about 4%, as FDM found. The heat pump is an investment in performance. 1, it is energy efficient when it comes to heating your battery. 2, it ensures that you quickly reach those 30 degrees Celsius, which is the critical temperature for fast and damage-free rapid charging of your car. 3, it saves you minutes on long trips where you use fast chargers because you start the charging brake at maximum charging speed and you've used about 3 to 4 times less power to preheat your battery beforehand. In short, if you often drive long distances, use fast chargers, and if the temperature is between 5 and 20 degrees, your heat pump is your time machine at the charging station, but not necessarily an economic advantage. It ensures that your electric car lives up to the promise of fast charging when you need it most. That is the real value of the heat pump, and that's why you should give it high priority when buying an electric car in a climate like ours. But there are also a few other things you need to consider, and I'll get into those here, because it's not all sunshine and roses. I myself am currently driving a car without a heat pump, and it takes almost an hour to preheat the battery for fast charging. During that time, the car uses almost 25% extra power just to drive. So you really have to consider whether you can make it all the way home if you do not want to use this extra energy to preheat the battery. If I arrive at the charging station with a winter cold battery at around 10%, well, then the car only charges at about 50 kilowatts compared to the optimal 200 kilowatts that I would normally be able to achieve. I hope you have learned a lot more about heat pumps, but remember, heat pumps are yet another thing that can break down. They require maintenance like an air conditioning system, and most of them are actually quite noisy during operation. So think carefully about it before you make your final decision on whether you should have a heat pump in your next electric car. If possible, go to a dealer with the car you're considering and try letting the car idle, so to speak. And then listen to how much noise the heat pump in that particular car actually makes. I hope you can use all the advice I've gathered about heat pumps in this episode, and that we'll see each other again on Sunday here on the Car Podcast. Take care out there.